Hey YouTube, it's Chris. Welcome back to my life. My grandfather was a bastard. I'm not suggesting his parents were never married. Ma and Pa were wonderful people and married many years, but their son was a bastard. We're going to start this story in 1965 when Albert died. Now, he was pretty well off. Chief engineer, and he'd been retired for 12 years. He left my great grandmother three bank accounts, each of them with probably the equivalent of today $100,000 in it. The 2-acre estate in Grand Beach, some investment property in Florida, and investment property up the coast of Lake Michigan, lakefront property. Nice stuff. And at some point in the late 60s, my great grandma decided that she wanted to take her sizable estate and split it equally between her three grandchildren, my father and his two younger brothers. Ken was pissed off. And so he spent the rest of the decade hatching a nefarious scheme. And when my great grandmother died in 1969, he tore up her will, got himself a shyster attorney to pretend there never was a will, and all of that went to Carol, who was spineless. And so that meant Ken got his greedy paws on everything. So the first thing he did is he sold the land in Florida, bought himself a speedboat, wrecked that speedboat, and sold the land in Michigan, bought himself another boat. Then he started pissing through all the money in the banks. He bought himself a third speedboat, bought himself cars, bought some land up in Manistee across from the National Forest, and built himself a hunting cabin. Do we have a theme here? My boats, my cars, my hunting cabin. Didn't set up a college fund for his kids or anything. Now, to be fair, my father was the first male in my family who went to college. From the time the first Hurlburt set foot on American soil in 1634, everybody was on the water. Thomas was in the British Navy, and then as we migrated from Connecticut to Michigan, they were the British Navy and the American Navy and the Merchant Marines and working on the Great Lakes ore carriers. That's why we all cuss like sailors. It's in our fucking blood. But anyway, there's that, the greed thing. Okay, that's just one little example. Now, for this next bit, I have to kind of go away from where we're at a little bit and just kind of give you some background. So, trying to figure out the best way to do this. It'll work. So, for those of you that don't know, in the late 60s and into the 70s, America was embroiled in a war against Vietnam. It was very unpopular at home, especially during this time. And one of the common complaints was that only black kids and poor kids were being sent to Vietnam to die because we had deferments in America, and anybody who was in college got a deferment. That's why there's that line in in Animal House that said, I've notified your local draft board that you're all eligible for the draft once they all get booted out of college. And so President Nixon in 1969 decided he was going to level the playing field. Okay, it wasn't just going to be for rich kids anymore, unless, of course, you could find a quack doctor to say you had bone spurs. But they had a draft lottery at the end of 1969. They had 366 balls. They had it on TV. They drew them out, and whatever the date was on that, your birthday, corresponded. My father's number 33. Okay, so he pretty much knew he was fucked. And just kind of going on that part. So in 1966, when he started college, he went to Eastern Michigan. He knew that he wanted to be a teacher, and Eastern Michigan at the time was the best teachers college in this country. And that's where he met Julie. She also wanted to be a teacher. My mom's story is completely boring as hell next to the story that I have been telling of my dad's family. She was born and raised in Jackson. Her parents was born and raised in Jackson. Kind of story. But when she was in high school at East Jackson, she was in the Future Teachers of America Club. She wanted to be a teacher. She went to Eastern. That's where they met, at Eastern Michigan. They were both in band. They met in the Marching Hurons, Eastern's marching band. But even though Dad wanted to be a teacher, he really wanted to be a band director. And Eastern had a great school of education, but their music department sucked. And so, just as he had gone to his high school band director, Mr. Holitz, to figure out where to go to college, he went to him again and said, I really want to specialize in music. What should I do? And so after a year, he transferred to a music conservatory in Chicago. This is the late 60s, and somehow over 3 years, my mother and father kept up a long distance relationship between Ypsilanti, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois. No internet, no email, no social media, no cell phones, just snail mail and really expensive long distance calls with landlines and payphones that you had to put a dime in and then find out how many more dimes you had to put in to make the damn call. So as it's getting closer to, I'd say, I wish I knew. I'm going to be honest. Full disclosure, I just don't know this part of the story really well. But at some point in 1970, I know that. My father is in school in Chicago, and he gets a call from my mother, who they're not my father and mother at the time. It's just easier for you to understand. Ron and Julie, okay? Let's just go with that. I guess we have to change the date. What the fuck are you talking about? Well, you've been drafted. What? Now we get back to the bastard, okay? And just a little moment to talk about the genius of the federal government sending a draft notice, not to where he's actually at in college, but to his permanent address. So Ken, my bastard grandfather, opened up my father's mail. Federal law, whatever, who cares? Opens his son's mail. Finds out he's been drafted. Now, do you think that if you open someone else's mail, forget about that, you see that your son, your oldest son, has been drafted, you gonna call him and let him know? Not Kenny boy. He called his son's fiance. Ha ha, you can't marry my son. He's been drafted. He's going to Vietnam. So she had to let him know. And then the son of a bitch got rid of the draft notice. Ken, obviously. Bastard, not a son of a bitch. Mom was a wonderful person. So there's that. Now, one of the other things that Ron and Julie did to stay in touch over those 3 years of a long-distance relationship is they were together as often as possible. So they visited each other's families constantly on breaks and vacations and whatever. And so they knew each other really well. My great-grandmother loved Julie. Loved her to death. Ken not so much, because Julie did not play his fucking game. Anytime any of his sons brought a girl home, come on over and sit on my lap, sweetie. Come on over. Not my mother. No, I'm good. Thank you. No. Fucking creep. Anyway, so as it was pretty commonly known that they were going to get married, Ron and Julie, after college, my great-grandma invited them to move in with her, take care of her in her old age. But as we talked about earlier, she died in 1969. 1 year too early. So Ron and Julie still moved into great-grandma's house. But you remember when I said in earlier videos, remember that there are two houses on the same property because that's going to come back to bite us in the ass? Here we go. So the houses weren't right next to each other, but they weren't terribly far apart. It's only 2 acres. And so there's, in the brick house, the one that Albert built for Ken and Carol, there's a window above the sink in the kitchen. And you can look out that window and see into the White House, my great-grandma's house. You can see into the dining room, the kitchen, and one of the back bedrooms. Ken kept his fucking face plastered against that window constantly. If my parents' lights were on at night, he'd call them. Why aren't you two in bed? You have work in the morning. If he saw them go somewhere, as soon as he saw them come back, he'd call them. Where'd you go? What were you doing? And yes, of course, continued to open their fucking mail. And then it really got just one last little bit on this, and we're going to come back to all this in other videos, but what I will say is this. Despite Ken being such a bastard, and unfortunately being their landlord since great-grandma died, my parents had a wonderful life when they first got married. They had nice house. Grand Beach is a nice place to live. And they got along really well with the country club set, which is another kind of thing that I don't really want to get into in this video because it's supposed to be about my bastard grandfather. And they had a really amazing hobby when they first got married that I'm going to talk about in another video. I'm not going to mention it now because this video is already getting ridiculously long. It's going to take me forever to upload. See what I do for you people? Love you all. And Mom was teaching in New Buffalo. Well, Julie was teaching in New Buffalo. Ron was band director at Ghislaine, a few towns over. So they had a great life. Then I came along 9 months later and ruined it. It's just the way it is. Okay? There was no family medical leave in 1971. And so after a particularly difficult birth, my fault again, when my mom, now she is mom, she's not Julie anymore, could not go back to work on Monday, they fired her. Hey, why not? And it's America. That's going to be happening again at some point. And then the financial strain and everything, the stress got to be too much for my father. He ended up in the hospital with bleeding ulcers and lost his job. They made it work as long as they could. Mom subbed pretty much everywhere in the area. Dad did odd jobs here and there. They both worked for our neighbor, really nice guy, that I'm going to get into in another video. So they did what they could. But here's getting back to the bastard, if we could. My father asked his father, would you please watch your only grandchild so that Julie and I can look for work? Nope, fuck you. Already raised our kids. You're on your own. Hell of a guy, isn't he? So I think that's pretty much it. You get the idea. The guy was a real bastard. And here's the thing. Remember in the intro video, and if you haven't watched that short, I encourage you to watch it. I talked about things that happened long before I was born, influence even what's now going on in my life. Many decades later, well, we're going to find out why I don't live in Grand Beach. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, take care of yourselves, you do.